And you have to imagine them not just mailed to a community, but being sent by a messenger secretary who takes them to the community, who reads them in their meetings. And then these are copied and treasured within that community and may be copied for another community nearby. So when he writes to the Thessalonians, that may be copied and lent to a church close by. Say to the Philippians, they may each have copies of one another's letters. And slowly but surely, a corpus, a collection of Paul's letters starts to be formed.
The great collection of letters ascribed to Paul are enshrined in 14 of the books of the New Testament. From his epistle to the Romans to his letter to the Hebrews. In Paul's day, these were all far-flung communities where the seeds of Christianity had already been planted. But could the enormous volume of writings attributed to Paul have been written by him alone? Scholars now question the authorship of some of the letters that bear his name.
It's clear from the letters themselves that Paul used a secretary. Dictation had already been invented. Cicero's secretary had invented a system of shorthand so that he could take down notes and then transcribe them. And it's clear that Paul used that because in a couple of letters he adds things at the end, and his handwriting is so ugly that he says, you know, just notice how ugly, what large letters I make, he says, because he didn't have a scribal hand. And then in one of his letters, one of his scribes gets so enthusiastic, Paul is sending greetings to everybody and from everybody, and then in Romans 16, the writer says, and I, Tertius, send you greetings. So he's apparently some Christian in the community where Paul is at Corinth, and he adds his greeting to Paul's greetings.
Timotheus, my workfellow, and Lucius, and Jason, and Sosipater, my kinsman, salute you. I, Tertius, who wrote this epistle, salute you in the Lord. Romans 16:22.
Of all the books in the New Testament, Revelation has proved to be the most controversial. Embracing a terrifying vision of the apocalyptic ending of the world and the advent of the Messianic era, the author of the book remains one of the Bible's most elusive personalities. Written on the island of Patmos in the Aegean about 60 years after the life of Christ, the book is ascribed to a man known only as John. The name was common in those days, and scholars have suspected him to be either the Apostle John or even John the Baptist. But the evidence is flimsy, and the issue remains unresolved. Nevertheless, Revelation, the 66th and final book of the entire Bible, still provides a daunting vision of the destruction of mankind and the establishment of God's kingdom on earth.
And I saw 3 unclean spirits come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, for they are the spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth into the kings of the earth and of the whole world, to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. Revelation 16:13.
Never in history have the Holy Scriptures been more accessible than they are now. But the Bible we know today may have been a very different book were it not for a long and unwieldy selection process that determined which books were to be included in it and which ones left out. The contents of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, had long been agreed upon, but the books of Christianity were the last to be accepted into the existing canon.
Today, when people think about the New Testament, they don't realize that there were actually debates about what belonged in it. Now we simply go to any bookstore and buy a Bible. Old Testament and New Testament usually combined together, and these are accepted as the Christian Bible. So that the whole process of understanding what the authority is over Christians is quite different now from what it was, say, in the 2nd or 3rd century.
By the 2nd century, the 4 Gospels had not yet been collected together as a unified work. They were individually known in widely separated areas of the empire. The new church in Rome had the writings of Mark. The East had Matthew. Luke was known to Christians throughout Greece, and the church in Ephesus had John. It is uncertain when it was first decided that the various Christian writings should be brought together. And even less is known about who may have instigated their assembly. But eventually, the collection was begun.
A catalyst for this was the second century Christian teacher Marcion, who was active in Rome for some time in the second century, who tried to draw up his own list. He may have been the very first person who said, now wait a minute, we have to have a list here, the books that are in, the books that are out. Unfortunately, Marcion was very, very anti-Jewish. He wanted to get out of the New Testament, out of the accepted books of Christians, anything that had a Jewish feel to it. And so only some of the epistles of Paul and only a mangled version of Luke's gospel could be taken in for him. Everything else, like Matthew's gospel, much too Jewish. You couldn't have that in there.
Marcion took the issue further. He planned to exclude all the books of the Old Testament from his Bible. His view was that the God of the Jews was not the same God of the Christians.
Marcion insists there are two different gods who gave two different sets of writings, the Jewish Bible and the Christian Bible. His Christian Bible included one gospel, a form of the Gospel of Luke, and 10 of Paul's epistles. Marcion was particularly fond of Paul because he thought that Paul himself differentiated between the law and the gospel. Most Christians rejected this idea because most Christians understood that Christianity had emerged from Judaism, that Jesus himself had been Jewish.
Over a period of years, the composite collection of the New Testament is slowly defined, but the selection process is not an easy one. Some early versions of the Bible included many texts that no longer appear in modern editions. These were the books of the Apocrypha, a collection excluded from the early Hebrew Bible when it was finally canonized.
The Apocrypha are those books which were included in the collection of the Septuagint Greek Bibles and not included in the Palestinian collection of the Hebrew Bibles. Examples would be the Book of Ben Sira, also known as Ecclesiasticus, books of the Maccabees. These books didn't get into the Hebrew Bibles because they were written in Greek and because they were written too late, really, to be included in the Bible.
The Jews decided finally that they would not accept those further books which were written in Alexandria and elsewhere, though some were written also in Palestine. They stuck very much to a list of books written in Hebrew and a little bit of Aramaic, which they had preserved in Hebrew and Aramaic. The emerging Christian church, especially the Catholic Church, accepted a number of further books that Jews wrote both in Palestine and in Alexandria that were preserved only in Greek. For instance, Wisdom of Solomon would be one of them. That's why, for instance, the Catholic Old Testament has more books in it than a Jewish Bible would have.
In addition to the Wisdom of Solomon, contemporary Catholic Bibles also include the books of Judith, Maccabees, Tobit, the Wisdom of Ben Sira, and longer versions of the books of Esther and Daniel than those appearing in Jewish or Protestant Bibles. Church authorities throughout the empire constantly argued in favor of canonizing certain books and of rejecting others. But eventually the time came to standardize the Christian Bible as most people know it in its present form, to include some books and eliminate others, to close the canon. It is unclear when this important decision was made, but many believe it happened in the 4th century, once the Emperor Constantine accepted Christianity, converted to it, and legalized it as the new religion of the Roman Empire. In 325 of the Common Era, Constantine convenes the Great Council of Nicaea, the world's first ecumenical gathering, forever defining the nature and function of the young Christian church.
If you were to put your finger on one point and say, at this moment it was definitely over, it was now canonized,